We're not as free as the Americans, a country born in revolution where freedom was the central issue. You really should read the Declaration of Independence. I mean, this stuff. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it. I mean, if that's the recipe for dissolving an old country and building a new country, you know it's going to be good. If you think that's good, well, you got to read their Bill of Rights too. First Amendment for free speech, Second Amendment for the right to bear arms. It's a pretty serious place when it comes to freedom, but you know, here in Canada, we're supposed to be pretty free too. We're more passive, to be sure. Canada got our independence through negotiation and legislation, not revolution. Same with Australia, New Zealand, pretty much the whole Commonwealth. But you'd think we'd still have kept the best of British freedom, the Magna Carta, the evolution of British liberty as enshrined in both laws passed by Parliament, but also centuries of common law, court rulings, and then there's just the culture, the literature, the arguments. This book, published in 1644 by John Milton, with the Greek name erode, for the liberty of unlicensed printing. What does that mean? 350 years ago, the British Parliament wanted to pass an order that you had to have a license before you could print a book. So it wasn't even just censorship, it was censorship before the fact. You couldn't even publish and then be censored. You had to go to the government first to ask for the right to publish in advance. How un-British. That's what I mean by the culture of freedom. There's laws, then there's the history, the customs, like John Milton. For centuries, freedom was the thing in the United Kingdom and the British Empire, and they spread it around the world. Surely we inherited enough of that. But I point out that while there have been some absurd violations of civil liberties in the United States, such as California's satanic rules that ban churches from opening, in general, America has been pretty free. I suppose partly it's because there are 50 different United States, and governors can only be a tyrant in their territory. And while California is unfree in part because it's so very Democrat-dominated, both the legislatures and the courts, well, most of America is saner and has more checks and balances because it's not so lopsided to one party. The Constitution of the United States applies across the country. America's done pretty well, all things considered. But what about us? In Canada and Australia and New Zealand and the UK itself, how have we done? We've done the worst, among the worst, not as bad as China, but terrible on the civil liberties side, I mean. New Zealand, they were so proud of themselves for not having any cases of the virus. They celebrated 100 days virus-free because they're a small island and they're fairly isolated, and then they basically stopped all air travel. And of course, because their prime minister is a woman, a socialist extremist named Jacinda Ardern, you had countless stories about how it was because she was a woman that New Zealand was doing so well. I'm serious. New York Times said that. You know, that's obviously a scientific explanation. Yeah, well, New Zealand cut itself off, but not 100%. So someone did come in with the virus, and it spread like wildfire to 4 people. 4. And they went into full panic, full authoritarian mode. Oh, Jacinda Ardern was just waiting for that. They went full crazy. They actually postponed their parliamentary elections for a month. They put 1,200 New Zealand soldiers on the street to enforce their mask laws. Mandatory tracking of people too. And listen to Ardern cackle about how she locks people up and keeps them locked up until they take some medical test.
That I wanted to, I've got a number of questions about people refuse, what do we do if someone refuses to be tested? Well, they can't now. If someone refuses in our facilities to be tested, they have to keep staying. So they won't be able to leave after 14 days. They have to stay on for another 14 days. So it's a pretty good incentive. You either get your tests done and make sure you're cleared, or we will keep you in a facility longer. So I think most people will look at that and say, I'll take the test.
Yeah, you can tell she was the youth president of the Socialist International. That's an excerpt from my daily show, The Ezra Levant Show. Every day I do a monologue on the news of the day, then I interview an interesting guest, and then I read my hate mail. You gotta subscribe. Go to rebelnews.com.